everybody, and welcome to an Unlocking Archaeology series presented to you by the Southern African Archaeology Student Council. My name is Mpumi, and I am the chair of the Student Council. I am joined by my fellow council members, Tatenda, who is the SADC representative, and Precious, who is our membership secretary. And for today, we have a special guest, but that's not my job to introduce him. I'll leave that to our host, Tatenda. But I can give you a little hint of where he's from. He is from a well-known company called PGS Heritage. And just before I hand over to our host, I'd like to remind our viewers to please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't hesitate to follow us on our social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And that's where we share relevant content such as bursary opportunities, job applications, and more. So please stay tuned and like and comment and subscribe, don't forget. And I'm gonna hand over to you, Tatenda. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Pumi, for warming up and putting us in the mood for today's lecture series. Well, allow me to say, before I introduce our special guest, I feel so honored to present him today. He is a director, a businessman, a founder, and a multi-experienced archaeologist. So, ladies and gentlemen, Wouter Fourie is a director of PGS Group of companies operating in South Africa, Mozambique, Lesotho, and Portugal. And he is also one of the founding members of PGS South Africa. Being a holder of a Cum Laude in archaeology, he is currently working towards completing his MPhil in heritage studies. He is a very experienced specialist consultant with over 22 years of experience, where he has been acting for this role within this period of time. Wouter has been providing tailor-made heritage solutions to mining, water, oil, and gas industries, which include heritage management implementation for Clanwilliam Dam, heritage management implementation for the Polihali Dam in Lesotho, and the Liquid Natural Gas Project in Mozambique. Exhausting all about his experience and involvement in the heritage industry, ladies and gentlemen, it would require more than one day for me to complete everything about his portfolio. Therefore, allow me to summarize and say Wouter is a member of the Association of Professional Heritage Practitioners, APHP, and the ASAPA, the Association of Southern African Professional Archaeologists. So before I hand over to Wouter, allow me to say, Wouter, it is a great pleasure, having you today, not only as a guest or a guest presenter, but also as a source of inspiration and motivation. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to please hand over to Wouter Fourie to take us through his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatenda. Thank you, Mpumi and Precious. Thank you very much for the opportunity to try and give you a bit of a peek into archaeology outside of academia and working with large-scale projects, working with clients, and seeing how it ticks. I know you guys gave me some guidelines in relation to sustainable development goals, so I'm going to try and link it up with some of our projects and just try and set the scene for where archaeology and heritage fits into the bigger picture when it comes to industries, development industries, infrastructure, and how they fit into fit together. So, okay, so let's go. Most of you would at some stage have run into sustainable development goals. We see it a lot when we do projects, especially the larger projects. It pops up a lot. How will this project be sustainable? And how will it work? So just shortly, the Sustainable Development, or SDGs, been developed by the UN from about 2015. And they've identified, the idea with them is to, in short, the idea of ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring, and this is a big one, sort of up there, is for all people to enjoy peace and prosperity. And I think it's a bit of a, at this moment, it's a difficult one to envisage with the current situation in the world. So there's just a sort of a summary of all those SDGs. And I think from where my perspective or my input in this and our company's input in this is, especially when it comes to facilitating things like affordable energy, those industries, industry, innovation, infrastructure, sustainable communities. Those are the main ones where we practice archaeology and heritage management. With this in mind, and SDGs, the international focus sort of on this from a governmental point of view are these 17 points. From an industrial or industry point of view, this sort of evolved over time, and it comes from a few years back, actually from the 60s about, where these developments can't realize without there being people footing the bill, without there being investors making sure this can happen. So, I mean, you can have an idea, but if you don't have the money to implement it, that's where it stays. And investors have become very savvy when it comes to, where do I put my money? And you would probably, I mean, this is a big thing in industry at the moment, is environmental and social and governance for large corporations, mining, oil and gas, right through the spectrum. And this ESG influences your status as a company, influences how investors decide where they put their money. And it's a lot about the social conscience around it. So investors would rather see them put their money in something that's for the greater good. That if we look at the SDGs, it adds to the sustainable development and development of that, of a project or an industry. Interestingly enough, in this last 2 years, especially with COVID, it's almost like we had a acceleration of this pushing towards making sure that this ESGs are addressed by all companies, and investors are pushing these companies to make sure this happens. With the main aim is, obviously, if you've got let's say an investor uses money from a retirement fund, and the fund managers wants to know, but what are you using that money for? Is it sustainable? Is it going to a project that we can sort of put up as saying we're putting money into this and it's for a good cause? And we've seen this is just steamrolled in this past 2 years as the main focus for investment companies. So I'm going to focus on the S side of it, obviously the S factor, the social side of this whole ESG, and keeping in mind that this all runs into sustainable development. So the social factor, I'm going to try and draw a correlation between the SDGs and the ESG, and it focuses on human rights, and then also on social interaction, where it comes to interaction between a development and the community. And then in this ESG, heritage and archaeology, that's a major part of this. And we typically see this interaction between communities and development. And the development, what it's trying to do at the end and how it works with the community, that's a major driver of this. And a lot of times this interaction is very strained between large developments and communities, even sometimes smaller developments and communities, and how it directly affects a community. A lot of times a development, let's work on a large scale development, influences the livelihoods of a community in various ways. In some cases, a community, a grouping needs to be resettled. So they need to be moved from where they are for various reasons, because of the type of development or the footprint of the industry or project. And this influences not only their livelihood, but the grounding of this community, which means that things like ancestral graves, shrines, areas of cultural practice, cultural landscapes, and tangible and intangible heritage is impacted by this movement or this project. And that's why it's important that we as archaeologists know where do we fit into this, this understanding of what heritage is. And I've put up there, we make a distinction between tangible and intangible heritage, and most of you guys would have run into this at some stage or another. So tangible is easy enough. It's stuff you can touch. Some you can move, some you can't move. And this is anything like we say archaeology, artifacts, paleontology. I think those two is the sort of closest to us as archaeologists when we practice archaeology. Other things are burial grounds and graves. Some of us are involved in that. And then buildings and structures, places and objects, a whole settlement, and how the settlement fits into the landscape and townscapes. That's tangible things you can touch. On the other side, the intangibles, and I think this is where a lot of work still needs to be done, especially when it comes to development, is integrating the intangible side of heritage into an understanding and making it work for a community and for projects. And these things are like oral traditions, expressions, performing arts, dances, social practices, rituals, knowledge and practice. That's a lot to do with IKS, and then also craftsmanship and skills. So I think what makes it difficult for us is the practice of heritage impact assessments and heritage management was for a long time just focused on the tangible side of things, and grappling with the intangible side of things and making it understandable not only for ourselves but also for the client. That's where the trick comes in, and that's where we can make things work or not. So what I'm going to do is from this is I'm going to look at some practical implications, some practical or international cases, and then at some of the projects we worked on, and then how impacts on these really made a big impact on the company or the industry it's involved in, and how it sort of the ripple effect has touched a lot of different parts of the project, and how people are envisaging and seeing how projects work in relation to the social sciences of things. Okay, so let's see if it goes. There you go. Okay, so some of you during the lockdown period would have seen this in the news. So mid-2020 in Western Australia, Rio Tinto, in one of the iron ore mines, they decided to continue mining, and through blasting damaged the Jukan Gorge archaeological and sacred site. Now, damage is a relative word because half of it was totally demolished. And the sacred site is intrinsically linked to the Aboriginal tribes in that area. So, interestingly enough, in this, obviously there was a huge social and public outcry on this. But during the inquiry, it became apparent that Rio Tinto was actually aware of what they were doing. They were ready to sort of go into litigation if somebody were to suddenly find out about what happened. And I mean, from a heritage perspective, the impact was immense. Damage to the site, the physical site, but more and more actually to the intangible side of it, and how the Aboriginal people experienced that. So the implication of this was, and you would, you know, from our side, obviously we're thinking from an academic side and from a social side, but from the industry side, the impact was immense. Rio Tinto's mining license was suspended. Investors, and this is where this ESG comes into, investors started saying, listen, what did you guys do? We're going to remove, I think they lost a few billion in just investment just because of that one action. The chair of Rio Tinto resigned, all the direct line managers resigned. So just to say, it wasn't, there was a, Rio Tinto felt the brunt of this. What did they do? At the end, obviously, there was a lot of interaction with the Aboriginal communities. Restitution was, there was talks about restitution. I think it's still ongoing. The big thing from the company side is there was a whole revision of how cultural heritage management was done, is done in the company, to such an extent that social scientists, heritage managers was appointed on corporate structure level, which means it's not on the mining level itself, but it's in the corporate structure these guys were appointed, which then brings me to the next point, is how do we understand our place as archaeologists within this larger framework of industry? So where do we fit in? One statement was that cultural and historic preservation is in itself sustainable development. So if we do that, we're adding to sustainable development at the end. So what's on our side? On our side is things like legislation in South Africa. The National Heritage Resources Act is a piece of legislation that can be used more than it's used now at the moment. There's NEMA, the National Environmental Management Act, and the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act. All those work together to make sure that we identify archaeology, heritage, and it is our job to give heritage a voice in this whole process of development. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how archaeological resources, where does it get meaning and where does it fit into? So in most developments, using South Africa as an example, you have, if it triggers the National Environmental Management Act, there's either a basic assessment report or an EIA for NEMA and for the MPRDA. And each of them, there needs to be an heritage impact assessment in that. So this heritage impact assessment, as most of you know, there's field work involved, there's background research. And at the end of it all, the idea is to have that document identify as far as possible all the heritage resources. And this then gets disseminated to the Heritage Authority, which must review the HIA, interested and affected parties during the stakeholder engagement. Some people don't even know the extent of heritage in an area. The EAP, the Environmental Impact Assessment Practitioner, they're responsible to take that information that you provide and put it into the EIA and eventually into the environmental management program. And then there's the client or the developer or big business that needs to be made aware of what was found in that development and make sure it's implemented. Okay, so let's go there. So just to give you sort of, when we get to the side of the EMPR, it's the client who appoints a competent contractor, which is very important, and then the interaction between the community and government and project management. And in that whole thing, there's the heritage practitioner that needs to be involved in that whole process. For us, a very big important thing on this whole is this inclusivity idea of making sure communities are involved in this. There's stakeholder engagement. Communities know their rights. They know what are their rights in connection with heritage and how it would influence their decision making. Okay. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that our recommendations when we do our reports is integrated into the environmental process, which ensures that somebody in the MPR would look after the archaeology. We would need to make sure that those recommendations we make is incorporated and understood. I think the understood side is very important. Explain it in a way that everybody can understand, that can convey that message. And then I'm going to jump quickly to one or two, three of our projects. The first one was the Clanwilliam project that we did from 2014 to 2016. The Mozambique Liquid Gas Natural Gas project we are still busy with. We started in 2016 with that one, and the Lesotho Islands project that we are still involved in, that we started in 2017. So just to give you an idea, the Clanwilliam Dam Project, there we did from the start an immense amount of background research, old photographs, documented the whole history of the dam building itself. Other components was documenting the landscape, how the cultural landscape changes over time. And this was done through fixed point photography over a 2-year period. So we can document how it changes, how the view, the climate change, the landscape changes through the seasons. Obviously, there's a lot of archaeology involved in that, excavations of later Stone Age sites. Sorry, there's something that popped up. Okay. Later Stone Age sites, and then I think one of the more cutting edge things that we did is there's a lot of Stone Age rock art that we 3 of the sites we 3D documented, so it was 3D scanned. Purely for the reason it's going to be underwater, and these specific panels we removed eventually. So just to give you an idea, top left hand corner, that's the actual photo, and the left hand bottom corner, that's the 3D scan, and you can actually do a walkthrough through that whole site. That's the same site where we removed the rock art panels. This is the other site. That's one that you saw we were busy excavating. This is the 3D scan of that you can basically walk through this whole site from one side to the other. And this is when we removed, that was a 3.5 ton block of panel that we removed, that a rock art panel. And then other things that we did was we documented local histories, doing documentation of old farmsteads, sourcing photos, finding the people that stayed there, documenting their stories. On the Mozambique project, There we were involved from the implementation side of writing a grave relocation action plan, interaction with the communities, writing that plan with their needs and requirements in there, and then implementing that relocation of those graves. At this stage, we've relocated, I think it was 1,100 graves, and that is still going at the moment. We also utilized technology, ground penetrating radar, magnetometry to identify unmarked graves, and then assisting to remove that with involvement of the community. And then finally, I'm going to show you one or two slides just from our Polihali project. We're still involved in that. All of the slides you're going to see here, that's been at some stage in social media. And the main thing about this contract is we were appointed to develop and implement the cultural heritage management plan. And that's intangible and tangible heritage. So it's archaeology and living heritage that we're working with. There's some indication, some of the finds that we've made in one of the excavations. This is about 2 years back, the excavation we did on this one. Some artifacts showing utilization in the landscape, and then as well as trade with the shells and ochre stained rubbing stones, and then things that came out in some of our last excavations showing a deposit of almost 2.5 meters that was developed over, I think it's about 3,000 years, showing from the later Stone Age with beautifully made tanked arrowheads, bone points, some smoking pipes, bringing it closer to the 1800s, decorated pottery, and then old pots that we've taken out of there. So wrapping up, I think the important thing from our side is looking at this archaeology and CRM work and interacting with clients and public as a whole, is that we should not see heritage as a bone of contention. It is part of what we do. It's part of communities, and it should work for them, and it should work for the client if you do it correctly, and if you keep them informed from the start on what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wouter. This was a very, very insightful presentation. You know, at first I had a dozen of questions, but now they've been reduced to just a very, very few questions. So before I pose my questions, among the group, is there anyone with a question? Yes, Mpumi, I think you have one.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to know about the rock arts panel that was removed. Where was it stored, and is there any form of signage that is put up nearby to just inform the public that this rock panel has been removed, for any of the people who would find that as a historical ground or ancestral sacred place?
The management of those 3 panels that was removed, the final idea of it was for it to be kept in Clanwilliam itself, in a museum or a exhibition set up there. At the moment, it's still in storage in Clanwilliam because of the project. Everybody's probably heard about the Clanwilliam project, and it is stalled at the moment. So implementing that finals part of putting those panels into a exhibition setup, that has not yet been implemented. I think from the understanding from our side is from where it was removed in the first place because it would have been underwater. So there's no indication of at where it was removed because that would be eventually flooded. The indication of where it comes from, that's all part of would be part of the exhibition at the end. So that's the idea of it, is to have it linked directly to town and the area, so it's not moving out of the area where it comes from.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mpumi, for the question. Any other question? Yes, Precious?
Okay, thank you, Tatenda. Thank you, Wouter, for the wonderful presentation. Mine is just a minor one in this, coming from the slide where you mentioned about the balance between tangible and intangible heritage. I just want to know what you are doing maybe as PGS to ensure that we do not lose the intangible heritage part, because if you see most of the organizations that deals with heritage, they focus solely on the preservation of the tangible part. So what are you doing as PGS to ensure that we do not lose the intangible heritage and we do not lose some of these, probably, for example, I'll give example, the dances, the oral histories that we have. What are you doing, or what do we have in place that ensure that these are preserved for the future generations?
Well, I think that's one of the tricky ones is when we do field work, we try as much as possible speaking to local people. It's slightly easier when we move out of the South African context and we're working in neighboring countries or in let's call it very rural areas to document that type of intangible heritage. But it's all about speaking to wherever the closest community is and getting the information on that. Making the recommendations for what to do with if there is a case of intangible heritage, that's a difficult one to do, and in most cases there's a lot of documentation around that, oral traditions. Make the recommendations to the project actually happens, and a lot of the times you as the practitioner loses contact with that, and it's in fact up to the developer at the end and the EP and the environmental authorities to make sure the recommendations are being implemented, which luckily at this stage the environmental authorities are very pedantic about implementation.
Okay, thank you, Precious, for the question. Do we have any other question? Okay, if we don't have any other questions, allow me to present my question. Thank you very much, Wouter, for the presentation. And from the presentation, I picked a number of interesting aspects, especially which relates to legislation. So my question is like, in regards to legislation, how favorable is it in as far as your work is concerned? How are you being at least represented by legislation in whatever that you do as an organization? And again, in whatever that you do, in trying to make sure that heritage is well preserved and well managed prior to any development.
I think there's two parts of it. The first one is if we look at the South African legislation side of things, and let's call it Southern African legislation, the written legislation that's in place for protecting and preserving heritage is very strong, and I think implementation to a certain extent is also very, very effective when it comes to up to the stage where you have the report and it's being reviewed and recommendations have been approved or not by the authority. I think maybe the lacking part of it is after that is the follow-up from the authority side. From our side, if we make recommendations and it's been approved by the Heritage Authority, we really can follow up with the client and push them to do that work. It's sort of, that's I don't want to say it's frowned upon, but it's in the hands of the authority at that stage to do that. If we go outside of the Southern African context, especially with big developments, IFC standards, the International Finance Corporation, they've got a big influence on developments and the implementation of recommendations. So the guidelines they've written is almost like legislation for big developments. In the case that they say you must look at intangible heritage, you must look at tangible heritage, and you must make recommendations to either preserve or mitigate, whatever the case might be. So there's sort of, on the one side is the authority management, and on the other side is an overarching sort of finance management that also imposes this type of management of heritage.
Thank you very much, Wouter. Any other question before I ask another one? Okay. Maybe just a follow-up to your response in regards to the whole implementation of the archaeological impact assessments or heritage impact assessments. In your own view and from your own experiences, who influences more the need for the impact assessments prior to any development? Is it the investor or / the client, or is it the legislation more? So if it's the legislation, is it like the investors or the clients are being forced to do that, like in your view? Or if the legislation is not as making it like the whole process mandatory before anyone does any development, is it now out of the client's discretion? Is it now out of the investor's discretion to look for PGS or any other companies for them to do the heritage impact assessment before any development?
I think in the South African context, it's, I don't want to use the word, as you said, you're forced to do it. It's just a case of it needs to be done. Legislation, NEMA legislation is very clear about it. And the triggers in it makes provision for either a basic assessment or an impact assessment that needs to be done for certain types of development. So from that point of view, there's definitely a legislative point, implementation of that. And I think it's part also a risk management thing from the client side, because the risk of doing a development without making sure that your legislation and your permitting is in place is just too great. Because as I previously alluded to, is that if you don't stick to what is required, your investors might say, but we're pulling the plug on this because you are not keeping to, let's say, the rules. Okay. Outside of South Africa, there's different countries at different strengths in the environmental codes. And what I've seen is where the environmental code is lacking and the type of work is lacking. The investor side, especially that I've seen the World Bank, they require, they in a lot of cases come back and say, you need to redo these studies because it's not up to standard. We're not prepared to sign off on any investment before this is not done correctly. So I think there's checks and balances on all sides of this. I wouldn't say in all countries, but I think overall in most large-scale developments, there's definitely checks and balances.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Nitya, do you have any question?
No, I don't. But
Okay,
I would like to apologize for coming in late.
no problem. Okay. Maybe just another question to you, Wouter. Maybe the last one. Okay. In regards to the expansion of PGS and its project, what are your future predictions, or what are your future projections in as far as crossing the borders into other countries with the project, or in as far as motivating other different heritage practitioners in doing such work? Because I'm looking at it from a perspective of activism. It's activism in a certain sense, but not in the sense that we know it. So what are your future projections? Like, for example, in the next so and so years, we are looking forward to be expanding into different parts of Africa, or for example, into Zimbabwe, or we are looking forward to, motivate other parties to do so and so in as far as, heritage preservation and management is concerned.
Okay, I think there's a few points there. The first is, if we look at the industry, South African industry, archaeological heritage industry, most people would know that's, or most people think it might be a big industry, but it's, in comparison to other specialist areas, it's not huge. I mean, if you compare just the amount of larger companies that's at work in South Africa, there's not a lot of them. We've been going for, what is it now? I think it's 22 years at this stage. And we've grown over the years. There's no exponential growth that happened. It was a slow growth. But I think there is scope for expansion depending on how legislation, let's start there. It's all linked to development. Most of our growth would be linked to development, either mining, infrastructure. The more development there is, obviously, the more opportunities that there are for work, and the more opportunities there are to expand the company and bring in more people. Here as it may, if we look at we started the process a few years back, looking at Africa as a whole, and looking at the opportunities there are. And that's why we've expanded into Mozambique, into Lesotho, and each of those countries, there's a different dynamic involved. If you look at Lesotho, the big driver there is the Lesotho Islands Development Agency or Authority. If we look at Mozambique, there's a few drivers there, and obviously at the moment there's natural gas, there's coal as well. That's a driver. So that's the type of thing we are looking at. We are, I think, envisaging in the next 5 years to move into other territories like Tanzania, and then we also looking at the European continent to get a foothold there, and bring some of our expertise for managing large-scale projects. I think that's our goal at the end, and things are looking up. Yeah.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. Before we round up, any contribution, questions, and anything?
I have a question.
Okay, Nitya.
I don't know if I missed this part, but so I'm currently doing my master's in archaeotourism and heritage management. So I would like to know if any of the work that you're doing currently is published, or if any of the reports are available, because I'd like to read up current reports and what's happening in the heritage sector right now.
Okay, so I think there's two parts of that. The one is all heritage impact assessments and phase 2s and management plans. They're all loaded up to SARAS, and they're all publicly available. So you can just go into SARAS and have a look there. There's actually quite a lot of documents available there. And then on the other side, looking at publications, There's some publications in the pipeline, especially on the larger projects. At the Polihali project, there's definitely some coming up in the next year, so keep your eyes open for that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Nitya, for the question. Any other? Yes, Pumi, I think you have
Thank
one.
you. If I can just piggyback on Nitya's question there. With regards to the South African reports that are done, we know that they put on SARAs, but as other countries like Lesotho or Mozambique, is that also linked to an online website that's publicly available, or do you have to find a different platform to put that up on?
Yeah, I think for the technical reports, especially in the other countries, they mostly link to those projects themselves. We are, I think, from the essence of the type of work we do and the reports we produce for those, we're not putting them up for availability to review. It's up to the client to release those. So a lot of those, if you just do a general search, you should come up with some reports. The EIAs are definitely would be up there. The technical reports is not necessarily available, provided to the public as easy access. Unfortunately, most of those cases, we don't have a control over that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we can round up our episode if there's no further questions. I'd like to thank you so much, Wouter, for being here and giving us representation and answering our questions. Thank you to our council members who have joined in, and also to Atenda, thank you for being our host. I think just for ease of access, we should add the SARA and SARA's links below in the description box, so it's easy access for anybody. And if everybody has any questions or comments that you would like to post, please do that in the comment section below. And I think we can end off there. Thank you so much for tuning in.